When I first heard my son James call his newborn daughter damaged, it felt like the world was tilting beneath me. The words lingered in the air, heavy with the weight of betrayal and disbelief. I couldn't fathom it. How could a father, someone who had been raised in this very home with love and care, speak about his own flesh and blood that way? Lily was only a few weeks old, delicate, pure, and yet James had already written her off, branded her with that cruel word. It was just the beginning of what would become the most painful chapter of my life, a chapter where I learned how deep betrayal could cut, even from those you thought you knew best. I had always been there for James, always put his needs above my own. His father and I had raised him to be a kind, compassionate man. But what I heard that day shattered everything I thought I knew about him. I had never seen James like this before. The son who once crawled into my lap for comfort, the boy who ran to me after every scraped knee, had turned into a stranger in a single moment. I tried to shake it off, convinced it was just frustration over the sleepless nights, over the challenges of new parenthood. But deep down, something told me this was more than just a fleeting thought. It was something deeper, something darker. Days passed and the tension between us grew. James was cold, distant, and his wife Sarah was no better. They seemed to have closed themselves off to me entirely. The room I had once shared so many cherished moments with my son felt emptier with every passing day. It wasn't just the silence between us. It was the heavy, suffocating weight of being pushed aside. But I couldn't put my finger on why. I could tell something was wrong, but I didn't know what. It was as if a veil had descended between us, and I was on the outside, peering in. One evening as I sat alone in the kitchen, I overheard a conversation between James and Sarah. They thought I couldn't hear them, but I did. "She'll never understand," Sarah said. "It's the best thing for the family. For everyone, really." My heart sank. I didn't know exactly what they were talking about, but I knew one thing for sure: it wasn't good. I had always been a part of their lives, a presence in their home, in their decisions. But now I felt like I was no longer welcome, no longer needed. The next few days were filled with subtle, unsettling moments. James's calls became shorter, his visits even rarer. I was left alone with my thoughts and my growing suspicions. Something was happening, something I couldn't quite understand, and it was starting to tear at the fabric of our family. The feeling of being an outsider in my own family was growing harder to ignore. I had to know what was going on, so I began paying closer attention to the little things. James's phone calls, the secretive meetings, Sarah's cold stares whenever she thought I wasn't looking. It was all adding up to something I wasn't ready to confront. Then one day I stumbled upon it. A folder, left carelessly on the kitchen counter. A form for an adoption agency. The words "consent to adoption" jumped out at me. My heart raced as I flipped through the papers, the reality of what I was reading crashing into me. They had given Lily up for adoption. Behind my back. James, my son, the man I had raised, had made the decision to take his daughter away from me, from the family, without even consulting me. I couldn't breathe. I felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. My son, the man I had trusted above all others, had betrayed me in the worst way possible. I knew I had to confront him, but I didn't know how. My heart was heavy with anger, with disbelief, and with an overwhelming sense of loss. How could this be happening? How had it all gone so wrong? I tried to stay calm, but the pain was unbearable. I waited until James came home that evening. He looked at me, expecting the usual warm welcome, but I couldn't hide the hurt in my eyes. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. James's face softened, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, something I hadn't seen before, guilt perhaps, or maybe fear. But whatever it wasn't enough to stop what was about to happen. "What is it, Mom?" he asked, his voice casual, too casual. "You gave her away, didn't you?" The words left my mouth before I could stop them, sharp and accusing. His expression faltered, and for a moment I saw something like regret. But then he masked it, his eyes hardening. "It's for the best," he said coldly. "She's not normal, Mom. You know that." The words hit me like a slap in the face. My heart shattered as I looked at my son, the man I had loved and raised, and I realized that he was gone. He wasn't the person I thought he was. And Lily? Lily was nothing but a burden to him, something to be discarded without a second thought. I felt the world shift beneath me, and I realized in that moment that everything had changed. Forever. The days following my confrontation with James were filled with an unbearable silence. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, and every time I closed my eyes I saw the adoption papers in my mind. It felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I kept asking myself the same questions. How had this happened? How had my son, the boy I raised, the man I trusted, become someone I didn't recognize? And Lily, what would happen to her? I spent those days in a haze, unable to focus on anything but the pain of betrayal. Every corner of my house felt empty without the sound of my son's laughter, without the joy of holding my granddaughter in my arms. The silence was suffocating, and the loneliness was worse than I could have ever imagined. I had always been there for James. I had sacrificed so much for him. When his father passed away, I stayed strong, taking care of everything, keeping the family together. I never expected to be treated like this, to be cast aside by the one person I thought would never turn his back on me. A week passed and my mind wouldn't stop racing. I found myself staring at the photo of Lily that James had sent me, her little face smiling, unaware of the cruelty unfolding behind the scenes. I thought about how her father had called her damaged, how he had decided her fate without ever considering what it would do to her, to me, to the family. I couldn't understand it. My son had been the light of my life, and now he was the source of my darkest pain. I knew I had to do something, but what? What could I do when the person who should have been my ally, my son, had become the enemy? Then one evening as I sat in my living room, staring blankly at the TV, I had a thought. I couldn't let this go. I couldn't let James get away with this. I had to find Lily. I didn't care how, but I had to know where she was. I had to make sure she was safe. The decision was made. I picked up the phone and dialed the number on the adoption papers. My hands trembled as I heard the voice on the other end. Yes, I'm looking for information about a child that was recently adopted. I explained as calmly as I could, but inside I was shaking. The woman on the other end was polite, but distant. She asked for my details and I gave them. Then she asked for my relationship to the child. I'm her grandmother, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I need to know where my granddaughter is. I have to be sure she's okay. There was a long pause on the other end. I could hear the woman's hesitation, and then she spoke again. I'm sorry, but I can't give out that information. My heart sank. Please, I begged, trying to keep my voice steady. She's my granddaughter. I just need to know she's okay. There was another pause, and then, after what felt like an eternity, the woman spoke again. I can't help you, ma'am. I'm sorry. I hung up the phone, my hands cold and shaking. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. What was I supposed to do now? I had no answers, no way of knowing if Lily was safe. I felt hopeless. But I couldn't stop. I couldn't just give up on her. I thought of all the times I had been there for James, the sacrifices I had made for him, and I realized something. I had never truly been important to him. He had taken me for granted just like he had taken Lily. I was no longer a part of his life, and neither was she. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. My son had changed and he wasn't the person I thought he was. I couldn't recognize him anymore. I had to stop waiting for him to come around, stop hoping he would realize the mistake he had made. I had to take action. And so I did. I started researching adoption laws, trying to find a way to legally get involved in Lily's life. I called lawyers, adoption agencies, and even reached out to family members who might have known something. Days turned into weeks and still I had no answers. But I couldn't give up. I thought of Lily every day, her sweet face, her innocence, and I knew I had to fight for her. And then one day I got a call. A lawyer from a family law firm, someone I had reached out to months ago, called to tell me they had found the adoptive parents. My heart skipped a beat. This was it. The moment I had been waiting for. I had to know where Lily was. The lawyer gave me the information I needed, and my hands trembled as I wrote it down. I had a name, a city, and a phone number. I couldn't wait any longer. I had to meet Lily. I couldn't let this go. The next morning I packed my bag, grabbed my keys, and headed out the door. I didn't know what I would find when I got there, but I knew I had to try. I had to make sure Lily knew she was loved, that she wasn't alone, and that I, her grandmother, would always be there for her. It had been days since I found out about Lily's adoption, and each minute felt heavier than the last. I couldn't stop thinking about her, Her small face, her innocent eyes, and the thought that she was out there, far away from me in the hands of strangers. I knew I had to meet her. I had to see for myself if she was okay. The call from the lawyer had given me hope, but I couldn't shake the fear that the adoption process might already be too far along. I tried not to dwell on the worst possibilities, but it was hard. What if the new parents didn't want me involved in her life? What if they already saw me as an outsider? The drive to the city felt like it took forever. The miles stretched on endlessly, the road before me blurring as I fought back tears. I had been a mother for so many years, I had loved and nurtured my son, and now I was fighting for the right to love my granddaughter, to be the grandmother she deserved. I didn't care what it took. I would fight for her. When I arrived at the address the lawyer had given me, I felt my heart race. It was a quiet suburban neighborhood, peaceful and neat, far from the chaos I had imagined. As I drove slowly down the tree-lined street, I tried to calm my nerves. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I knew this was the moment that would define everything. I parked in front of the house, took a deep breath and walked up to the door. My hands were clammy, and my heart pounded in my chest. I knocked softly, my mind racing. The door opened after a moment, and a woman appeared. She looked to be in her early 40s, kind eyes, a soft smile on her face. She greeted me politely, but I could see the hesitation in her eyes. I introduced myself, trying to remain calm, though my voice trembled slightly. "I'm Lily's grandmother," I said. "I'm here because I need to see her. I need to know that she's safe." The woman's smile faltered for just a moment, but then she stepped aside, motioning for me to come in. I followed her into the house, my heart racing with anticipation. The house was warm, inviting, with the smell of fresh coffee in the air. It looked like a home where love and care were abundant, but all I could think about was Lily. The woman led me into the living room, and there on a soft rug was Lily. She was sitting up, her little hands reaching for a toy, her face lit with the purest joy. My heart ached as I saw her. She was perfect. She was everything I had hoped for, and yet the realization hit me like a wave. She was here with strangers. Strangers who, despite their kindness, would never love her the way I could. I stood there for a moment just watching her, not knowing what to say. The woman must have sensed my overwhelming emotions because she stepped forward. "Lily is well taken care of," she said gently. "We've been raising her with all the love and care we can give. We want what's best for her." I nodded, feeling the tears start to sting my eyes. "I know," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I just want to be a part of her life. I'm her grandmother, and I don't want to be cut out of it. I want her to know me, to know where she comes from." The woman paused for a moment, her expression softening. "We've been considering the situation carefully," she said. "We want what's best for Lily too. And if that means allowing you to be in her life, then we'll do what we can to make that happen. We're not trying to keep her from you." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. I had hope. For the first time in what felt like forever, I had hope. We talked for a while longer, discussing how I could be involved in Lily's life. The woman was kind, understanding, and open to the idea of me visiting regularly. I promised I would be patient, that I would respect their role as her parents, but I made it clear that I would never stop being her grandmother. Lily would know me, and she would know that I loved her. After our conversation, I left the house feeling a weight had been lifted. It wasn't the happy ending I had dreamed of, but it was a chance. A chance to build something with Lily. A relationship that couldn't be taken away. As I drove back home, I couldn't help but smile. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. I wasn't going to let anyone take her from me. I had been through too much and I was stronger than ever. This wasn't just about me. It was about Lily, about showing her that no matter what happened, she would always have someone who loved her unconditionally. I knew there was still a long road ahead, but for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was on the right path. And that was all I could ask for. The weeks that followed were a blur. I tried to settle back into my routine, but the emptiness in my home, in my heart, lingered like a shadow I couldn't shake. Every time I walked past Lily's room, now empty of her toys and the soft sounds of her laughter, I felt the weight of what I had lost. But I couldn't give up. I couldn't let go. No matter how much time passed, I couldn't stop thinking about her. I had to make sure I remained a part of her life. I started visiting regularly, just as I had promised the adoptive parents. The visits were brief at first, a few hours here and there, but each one felt like a victory. I cherished every moment I had with her, watching her grow, seeing the spark in her eyes, the way she reached out for my hand. I could see the love her new parents had for her, and it gave me comfort, but it wasn't the same as being her grandmother. It wasn't the same as being the one to tell her bedtime stories, to watch her take her first steps, to see her face light up when she recognized me. I missed those moments. I longed for them. And yet, as much as I ached to be more involved, I respected their boundaries. They were kind, but they were protective, and I couldn't push too hard. I could feel the tension in the air whenever I visited, a reminder that while they allowed me to be there, I was still an outsider. But I couldn't be deterred. I wasn't giving up on Lily. One afternoon after a visit, I sat in my car in the driveway, my hands clenched on the steering wheel. I had just said goodbye to her, and the ache in my chest was almost unbearable. But I knew I had to do more. I had to make sure that Lily knew without a doubt that I was here for her, that I would never give up. I had raised my son James with the belief that family was everything, that love, no matter what, was the glue that held us together. But somewhere along the way he had lost that belief. He had chosen to push me aside, to cast me out of his life, and now he was doing the same to Lily. I couldn't let that happen. I couldn't let him erase me from her life the way he had erased me from his. I thought back to the times I had spent with James as a child, the long summer days when we would play in the backyard, the quiet nights when we would talk about his dreams and his hopes for the future. I had always been there for him, even when things were difficult. But now all of that seemed like a distant memory. I was no longer the person he turned to. I was no longer the mother he relied on. And that realization stung more than I could put into words. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about Lily. It was about making sure she knew that there was someone out there who loved her, who would always be there for her, no matter what. I knew I had to find a way to show her that, even if it meant doing it from a distance. I couldn't give up on her, not when I had already lost so much. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, I continued my visits. Each one was harder than the last, but I couldn't stop. Lily was growing so fast, and I didn't want to miss a single moment. I began to notice things, little signs that she was beginning to recognize me. Her smile when she saw me, the way she reached out to hold my hand. It was small, but it was enough. It was enough to keep me going. I couldn't help but wonder what would have happened if things had been different. If James had been a different person, if I had been able to be a part of Lily's life from the beginning, would things have been easier? Would we have been able to form the bond one longed for? But I couldn't dwell on that. The past was the past. All I could do was look ahead and hope that the future would bring the relationship I so desperately wanted with Lily. I knew it wouldn't be easy. I knew there would be obstacles along the way, but I was ready for them. I had to be. Because this wasn't just about me anymore. This was about Lily. It always had been. Months passed, and with each visit, I noticed something changing inside me. The ache in my chest that had once felt like an insurmountable mountain began to shift. It was still there, still a constant presence, but it didn't consume me as it had before. I had learned to live with it, to find solace in the moments I spent with Lily, however brief they might be. Every smile she gave me, every touch of her tiny hand, was enough to keep me going. It was enough to remind me that I had a place in her life, even if it wasn't the place I had imagined. But as the months went by, I couldn't ignore the fact that I was still an outsider. I was still walking on the periphery of her life, never fully integrated, never fully accepted. I couldn't help but wonder if James had planned it this way. Had he intentionally kept me at a distance, knowing that I would never be able to reclaim my role as her grandmother? I knew the answer in my heart, but I didn't want to admit it. He had always been the center of my world, and I had always assumed the same of him. But now, I realized that I had been holding on to a version of him that no longer existed. The man I had raised, the son I had loved, had changed in ways I couldn't have imagined. And with that change came the painful truth. I had lost him. But I wasn't ready to lose Lily, not completely. I had made a promise to myself, a promise to her that I would never stop trying. I couldn't be her mother, I couldn't be the one who raised her, but I could be her grandmother. And I would do everything in my power to make sure that she knew me, to make sure that she understood that no matter what happened, I would always be there for her. One afternoon, as I sat in my car in the driveway of the house where Lily was living, I made a decision. It wasn't enough to just visit her every now and then. It wasn't enough to just show up and hope that things would change. I had to be more proactive. I had to take control of the situation. I had to show James that I wasn't going to sit quietly by while he pushed me out of Lily's life. I had to make it clear that I wasn't going to let him get away with it. But how? I had no power, no influence. James had made it clear that he was in charge, that he was the one who made the decisions for Lily. And yet I couldn't just accept that. I couldn't accept that the bond between a grandmother and granddaughter could be so easily severed. The next day I reached out to the adoption agency again. I asked for more information, this time more assertively, making it clear that I was determined to be involved in Lily's life. The woman on the other end of the phone was polite, but her tone was distant. She told me that the adoptive parents were the final authority, and that any involvement I had in Lily's life would have to be approved by them. I knew that already, but hearing it again stung. I wasn't going to give up, though. I couldn't. Lily needed me. I needed her. Over the next few weeks I continued my visits. But I also began taking small steps to assert myself more in her life. I started sending letters to her parents, letting them know how much I loved Lily, how much I wanted to be a part of her world. I didn't push too hard, but I made my intentions clear. I wasn't going to fade into the background. I wasn't going to let them forget about me. And then one day I received a call. It was from the adoptive parents, and for the first time they asked me to meet with them. I wasn't sure what to expect, but my heart raced as I agreed to the meeting. When I arrived, they were sitting in their living room, waiting for me. The atmosphere was tense, but there was something else there too. A sense of anticipation. I could tell they were struggling with something, but I wasn't sure what it was. "We've been thinking about what you said," the adoptive mother said, her voice tentative. "We understand how much you love Lily, and we want to find a way for you to be involved in her life. We don't want to keep you away, but we need to set some boundaries." My heart swelled with relief, but I held back the tears. "I understand," I said softly. "I just want to be a part of her life. I don't need to be the center of it. I just want her to know that I love her." They nodded, and we began to discuss the details. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. We agreed on a plan, one that would allow me to visit regularly, to send letters, and to remain involved in Lily's life, though with limitations. I walked out of that meeting with a renewed sense of hope. It wasn't everything I wanted, but it was enough. It was a chance to prove to Lily, and to myself, that family wasn't about who was the loudest, who had the most power. It was about love. And that love, no matter the circumstances, would always find a way. I knew I had a long road ahead of me, but for the first time in months, I felt like I was moving forward. And that, in itself, was a victory. The weeks that followed were marked by a strange sort of calm. I had a plan in place. The visits, the letters, the occasional phone call, it was all working, or so I thought. Every time I saw Lily, I felt the connection, but there was always something missing. I was never quite a part of her world. It was as if I was an outsider, someone who was allowed to visit but not truly embraced. I tried to tell myself it was enough. I had fought for her, and now I had some part in her life. But deep inside, I knew it wasn't enough. I couldn't just be a visitor in her life. I wanted to be her grandmother, the one who was there for every milestone, every birthday, every holiday. I wanted to be the one she turned to for comfort, for love. But every time I reached out, I felt the distance between us. It wasn't just about what I could give her. It was about the bond we could form, the memories we could make. But there was something else that I had to face. Something I had been avoiding for so long. James. I had avoided him, not wanting to face the man he had become, the son who had betrayed me, who had cast me aside. I had been avoiding the confrontation I knew would come. But the truth was, I couldn't avoid it forever. It was time to face him, to find out where we stood, to find out if there was any hope of mending the relationship we once had. I couldn't just be in Lily's life without confronting the past, without knowing where I stood with James. So, one evening I made the decision to reach out. I called him. My hands trembled as I dialed his number. The sound of the phone ringing felt like an eternity. I didn't know what I was going to say, what I was hoping to hear. But I had to try. Hello. His voice came through hesitant, almost unsure. James, I said softly. I need to talk to you. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could feel the tension building, the weight of years of silence hanging between us. I'm listening, he said finally. I want to see you, I replied. I need to talk about everything, about Lily, about what happened. We need to figure this out. There was another long pause, and for a moment I wondered if he would hang up, if he would refuse to face me. But then he spoke again. Fine. Let's meet tomorrow. The next day I drove to the coffee shop we had agreed on, my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't sure what I was walking into. Would he apologize? Would he finally acknowledge the pain he had caused me? Or would he remain the man who had shut me out of his life, the man who had betrayed me so deeply? When I arrived, James was already sitting at a table by the window, his eyes glued to his phone. He looked up when he saw me, and for a brief moment I saw something flicker in his eyes. Guilt maybe, or regret. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. He stood up, and I could see the tension in his posture, the way he held himself like he was bracing for something. Sit down, I said, my voice steady but firm. He sat, and for a moment neither of us said anything. The silence between us was thick, uncomfortable, but it wasn't the same silence we used to share. This one felt like an ocean between us, vast and cold. Finally I broke the silence. Why did you do it? I asked. Why did you push me away? Why did you give Lily up without even telling me? His eyes darkened, and I could see the defensiveness in his face. It wasn't like that, he said quickly. I did what I thought was best for the family. For Lily. You don't understand. I don't understand? I repeated, my voice rising slightly. You gave away your daughter, James. You gave her away behind my back, and you expect me to just accept it. I didn't want you to get hurt, he said quietly. I didn't want you to be disappointed, to feel like I was taking Lily away from you. But it was the right thing to do. I thought it was what was best for everyone. Best for everyone? I shook my head, my heart breaking all over again. Best for everyone? Or best for you? Because it sure as hell doesn't feel like what's best for Lily, or for me. James looked away, his gaze falling to the table in front of him. I'm sorry, he said softly. I didn't mean for it to be like this. I didn't know what else to do. I sat back in my chair, taking a deep breath. I didn't know what to say. I had always believed in my son. I had always trusted him. But now, looking at him, I wasn't sure if I even knew who he was anymore. I need you to understand something, I said quietly. I will never stop loving Lily. She's my granddaughter. And I will always fight for her. No matter what. James nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. I know, he said softly. I know. But I don't know how to fix this. I looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in a long time. And in that moment I realized something. I didn't know how to fix it either. But I had to try. For Lily's sake, for my sake, I had to try. Because family wasn't about being perfect. It was about trying even when things were broken. Even when everything felt like it was falling apart. And I wasn't ready to give up on that, not yet. The weeks after that meeting with James were filled with a strange, suffocating silence. He kept his distance as he always had. But now there was an unspoken tension between us that I couldn't ignore. It was as if we were both waiting for something, waiting for the next move, but neither of us knew what that move should be. I had made it clear that I wasn't going to give up on Lily, but it felt like James hadn't truly understood the weight of my words. And in some ways I couldn't blame him. He had become a stranger to me, and I had to remind myself every day that he wasn't the same person I had raised. I had to let go of the illusion of who he was. I had to accept that my son had changed, but I couldn't accept that the bond between us could just disappear. I couldn't accept that he had shut me out completely. And yet, every time I thought about it, I was faced with the same painful truth. My son, my flesh and blood, had betrayed me, and in doing so, he had also betrayed Lily. I couldn't stop thinking about that little girl. About how she deserved so much more than to be treated as if she was a burden. I couldn't just sit by and watch as James tried to rewrite the story of her life. As if he had the right to decide who she should be, and who should love her. No, I couldn't let that happen. I couldn't let him take that from me. So I continued my visits, each one harder than the last. Every time I saw Lily, I felt the distance between us, the gulf that had been created by the choices James had made. I watched her grow, watched her take her first steps, her first words, and each moment was bittersweet. It was a privilege to witness it, but it was also painful because I knew that she wasn't growing up in the family I had dreamed for her. She wasn't growing up with the love I had hoped to give her. One afternoon, as I watched Lily play in the living room, I couldn't help but feel that sense of distance again. She was smiling, her tiny hands clutching a toy, and yet I felt as though I was on the outside looking in. I wanted to be the one to comfort her when she cried, to be the one to hold her when she needed love, but instead I was just a visitor. And as much as I told myself it was enough, it wasn't. Never would be. That evening I sat alone in my kitchen, the sound of the clock ticking in the background. I thought about everything that had happened, about the decisions I had made, the choices that had brought me here. I thought about my son, about the man he had become, and I realized something. I couldn't keep doing this. I couldn't keep waiting for him to change, for him to suddenly see things the way I did. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't. I had to take control. I had to fight for my place in Lily's life, and I had to do it now before it was too late. I made a decision that night. I wouldn't just be a visitor anymore. I would fight for my role as her grandmother, and I would do whatever it took to ensure she knew she was loved by me. The next day I called the adoptive parents again. I asked to meet with them to talk about my involvement in Lily's life. I wasn't going to beg for their approval, but I needed them to understand how important this was to me. How important Lily was to me. When I arrived at their house for the meeting, I felt a sense of determination I hadn't felt in weeks. This was it. This was the moment where everything would change. I wasn't going to let them keep me on the sidelines any longer. I walked in with my head held high, ready to make my case. The adoptive mother greeted me warmly, but I could see the hesitation in her eyes. She had been kind to me, but there was still a wall between us. "Thank you for meeting with me," I said, sitting down. "I know this hasn't been easy, but I need you to understand that I will never give up on Lily. She is my granddaughter, and I will always fight for her." The adoptive father nodded, but I could see the concern in his face. "We understand how you feel," he said, his voice gentle. "But we need to make sure this is what's best for Lily. We don't want to put her in the middle of anything. We just want her to feel safe and loved." I nodded, trying to hold back the tears. "I just want her to know that she has a family who loves her. That she has a grandmother who will always be there for her, no matter what. I'm not asking for anything more than that." There was a long silence as they exchanged looks. I could tell they were weighing my words, considering what to do next. Finally, the adoptive mother spoke. "We want what's best for Lily too," she said softly. "We've been talking, and we think it's time for you to have more involvement in her life. We'll work out the details, but we're willing to make it happen." I felt a surge of relief wash over me. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. It was a chance, and it was all I needed. I left their house that day feeling like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. It wasn't the end of the story, but it was the beginning of a new chapter. I was no longer just a visitor in Lily's life. I was her grandmother, and I was going to fight for her every step of the way. As the days passed, I found myself stepping into a new role, one that I wasn't sure I was ready for but knew I had to embrace. Being a grandmother to Lily was different than I had imagined, but it was also more precious than I ever could have dreamed. The visits became more frequent, and with each one, I felt like I was slowly stitching myself back into the fabric of her life. I watched her grow, and with every small milestone, every laugh, every step she took, I found myself more deeply connected to her, even if it wasn't in the way I had always hoped. The bond we shared wasn't the one I had dreamed of, the one where I was there from the beginning, but it was a bond nonetheless. And that, I told myself, had to be enough. I still had moments of doubt, of course. There were times when I would look at Lily and wonder what could have been. What if James had never pushed me away? What if things had been different from the start? But I couldn't live in the past. I couldn't change what had happened. All I could do was make the most of the time I had with Lily now. I had learned to appreciate the small moments, the way her face would light up when she saw me, the way she would reach for my hand when she wanted comfort. They were small, fleeting moments, but they meant the world to me. One day, as I sat with Lily in the park, watching her play on the swings, I realized something. I had been so focused on what I had lost that I had forgotten to appreciate what I had. I had a chance to be in her life, to be a part of her world, even if it wasn't the way I had imagined it. And for that I was grateful. The park was quiet, the sun shining down on the little playground where Lily giggled and swung higher and higher. I smiled as I watched her, her joy so pure and untainted. She was growing up in a home where she was loved, where she was cherished. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And that was something I could live with. As I sat there watching her, I thought about the journey I had been on, the pain, the betrayal, the moments of doubt and heartbreak. It had been a long road, one I never expected to walk. But in the end, I realized that I had found something worth fighting for. I had found a way to be a part of Lily's life, even if it wasn't the way I had envisioned it. And that, I told myself, was enough. The sound of Lily's laughter filled the air as she swung higher, her little hands gripping the chains as her feet kicked into the sky. I felt a tear slip down my cheek, but this time it wasn't one of sadness. It was a tear of gratitude, of acceptance. I had fought for my place in her life and I had earned it. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And that was all I could ask for. I knew the road ahead wouldn't always be easy. There would be challenges, more heartache, and more moments of doubt. But I also knew that I wasn't alone. I had Lily and she had me. That was enough to give me hope for the future. It wasn't the future I had imagined, but it was a future that was mine to shape. A future where I would be there for Lily, every step of the way. I wiped away the tear and smiled. Lily was still laughing, her joy infectious, and for the first time in a long time I felt at peace. I had found my place in her world, and that was enough. It would always be enough. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks slowly blended into months. Lily had become a part of my life, and each visit brought a new layer to our connection. At first it had been awkward. There were moments of uncertainty, moments where I wondered if I was intruding into their world, but as time passed, I began to feel more at home. I had a place in her life now, even if it wasn't the place I had once imagined. I was her grandmother, and that title meant more to me than anything else. I wasn't just an outsider anymore. I was someone she could turn to when she needed love, someone who could offer comfort when she needed it. I had come to understand that this bond, this relationship, was something we would build together. It wouldn't happen overnight, and it wouldn't be perfect, but it would be real. One afternoon, as I sat with Lily in the park, watching her chase after a butterfly, I felt a quiet sense of pride. She was growing up, full of life and wonder, and she was surrounded by people who loved her. I didn't have the same role I had once hoped for, but I was there for her in the ways that mattered. I didn't need to be everything for her. I just needed to be enough. It was a humbling realization, but it was one that gave me peace. As Lily ran towards me, laughing and holding the butterfly she had caught, I reached out to take her tiny hand in mine. Her face was beaming with joy, and I couldn't help but smile. This was what I had fought for. This was what I had longed for. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and it was enough. Over time, I began to see James in a different light. He still wasn't the son I had once known, but he was trying. He was trying to be a father to Lily, and that was something I had to acknowledge. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when I questioned whether he truly understood the gravity of his actions, but I realized that he was doing the best he could, just like I was. I had always hoped that our relationship would be restored, that we would find a way to heal the wounds between us, but as the months went by, I began to accept that it might never be the same. And that was okay, because in the end it wasn't just about James. It was about Lily. It was about making sure she grew up knowing that she was loved by everyone around her. I had made my peace with the past. I had let go of the anger, the disappointment, the resentment. All I wanted now was to be there for her, to be the grandmother she deserved. And with time I saw James begin to soften. He wasn't perfect, but he was there, and that was enough. I knew there would be more challenges ahead, more difficult conversations, and more moments of uncertainty, but I also knew that I was ready to face them, because in the end it was all worth it. Every sacrifice, every moment of pain, every tear had led me to this point, to a place where I was no longer just a visitor in Lily's life, but a part of it, and that was more than I could have ever asked for. As I watched her play in the park, the sun setting behind her, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. She was my granddaughter and I was her grandmother. And nothing, not even the mistakes of the past, could take that away from me.